Welcome to National Young Writers Festival, everyone. I'm Jay Emmanuel Kaya from Nunga Buja. I'm a theatre maker, I'm a writer, and it is amazing to be here with all these incredible people. I'll just pass on to the others to introduce themselves very quickly before we get on to a very hot and sexy panel discussion.
Hi, I'm Tabitha Wu. I'm currently on the Gadigal, country of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. But I'm originally from Moonina country in Hobart, Tasmania. I'm a playwright and theatre maker, among other things.
I'm Ange Collins. I'm also streaming to you live from the country of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I'm originally from Newcastle, so the lands of the Awabakal people and the Worimi people as well. So want to give a huge Newey shout out to everyone who is watching from there.
Hi, I'm Ian. I'm on Gadigal country. And I'm a playwright, but also an experimental artist. So I make work that is immersive and large scale and sort of audience driven.
Hi, I'm Liam. I'm speaking to you live from Melbourne, I'm in Wurundjeri country in the Kulin Nations, which is also where I grew up. I'm a theatre maker and performer.
Great. Let's dive into this. The question is, why isn't theatre sexy? And I guess the first question for us is, theatre obviously doesn't have the same mass cultural appeal as screen. Why do you think that is? Who would like to have a go first?
I'm happy to start because it's a huge question, but one of the I'm going to answer the whole question, guys. There'll be nothing else to talk about for the rest of the night. My first thought here is that theatre has a reputation for being for smart, like intellectual types, and that there is a concern that if you go to the theatre sometimes, especially if it's like Shakespeare, or on the other hand, a more like contemporary experimental piece, that people are scared that they might not get it. And I think there's something about theatre that does toy with experiments more than film, especially mainstream film, does. So I think it's tricky to take someone to the theatre, maybe on a date, if we're talking about theatre being sexy, because you might come out of it feeling a little bit stupid, and no one wants that.
Yeah, I think there's something as well about like the attention spans of audiences, and that a lot of television is made in terms of its like editing and dialogue. Its whole intention is to keep you engrossed, and I think theatre is such a different art form. There's also the relationship of a lot of commercial theatres to like the canon and the history of things. So I feel like in terms of I feel like growing up in Australia, a lot of my relationship with theatre was with like Shakespeare. That was kind of how I associated it. And then I suppose there was kind of the other end growing up in Melbourne of the experimental theatre that I didn't feel like I quite understood. But I think there's something about the attention span of audiences and the way we receive things as I guess as a audience member in this generation, consuming like Instagram and a lot of different things. And I think a lot of TV is made for that kind of quick burst, fast experience that kind of is immediately engaging. Whereas I feel like a lot of theatre that I've experienced isn't the intention of it.
And it's also kind of like theatre demands more, doesn't it? In terms of like it demands attention, it demands more resources and energy. It's like a relationship, whereas screen to me feels a little bit more like it's short dates that happen.
But I also think, theatre's like inconvenient. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's a hassle. Like, and we're such a screen-based culture that, the storytelling that we understand and digest is very screen-based now. And so in a way, I think that's probably more of it. It's more of an inconvenience in that way. But I also think, I don't know if theatre has to be that mass culture appeal. It doesn't have to be for everyone. And I actually kind of believe that. Like, I believe that it needs to be inclusive and diverse and all those things. But I think, stories can be told specifically to a specific audience in that way, I think, versus, the mass appeal of a Netflix or something like that. So yeah, that's what I kind of think about. And I guess it's like, the theatre for specific audiences, right? Like, I think of something like there's a theatre company in Perth called Sensorium, and they make work for kids with multiple and diverse disabilities. And I think, it's also, theatre can be that thing that doesn't have to appeal for everyone. It can be that specific community or group or place that it can exist in.
Totally. And I think also like theatre and screen can like work really beautifully together. And I think that we're going to see more and more of that. Like, I don't want to bring up the C word, which is COVID, but like that has kind of, there's been hits, there's been misses, whatever you think about live stream theatre. It is a thing that we have very quickly become accustomed to. And I think that will grow more sophisticated as we go on. And I also am going to mention the H word, which is Hamilton, and I'm so sorry. But if you look at like Hamilton streaming on Disney Plus, like so many of my friends, not even like my like theatre friends, just like my normie friends who don't care about theatre at all, like they got a Disney Plus subscription just to watch Hamilton and then deleted it. So I think like the theatre can have mass appeal, and I agree with you, Ian, of like different theatre for different purposes. Theatre for purpose. Yeah,
I think that's great. And I just wanted to bounce back onto you, Ian. You reminded me of a story, because as theatre people, we always turn up on time. The show always starts at whatever time it starts, which can be one thing that makes it accessible for people, because we've all got such busy lives, and that's why streaming is so popular at the moment. I know my partner and I went to see a friend's album launch, and it said like doors open 8 o'clock or something. So we were there at 7:45, and we didn't even get to see her, because apparently musicians don't start until they have the pre-act, and then it's the main act is later on. So I think it's such a different way that theatre people and other activities, you conceive of schedules, which is surprisingly a huge obstacle.
But I think it's also kind of what, like Ange was saying as well, like going virtual also opens up, access to people who couldn't physically access those buildings and those spaces before as well. So there's a lot of positives, not to like jump into the C word, but there are a lot of positives around going virtual. And I think, the definition of theatre can possibly be sexy virtually too as well,
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think it also opens up so many possibilities about what formats we show theatre in. At the moment, kind of like in Australia, we have this idea around a show is around 70 minutes long. You go to a theatre, all of that. I think we can also, with COVID, I think we've started to actually play with what the formats are. 15-minute piece of theatre, 10-minute piece of theatre. I mean, like, how do we tell stories in a theatre? And this hybrid with screen. Has anybody experimented recently with that? This is how you know it.
I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting, though, in terms of what you said, Ian, because I think when we do make theatre, and we make digital theatre, I think it also makes it a lot more convenient because people can be watching it from their homes and they don't have to give it their full attention as well. Like they can still be scrolling Facebook or they can be engaging with something else, and they don't like. I think it can potentially cost you less energy than the focus that's required of being in a physical theatre space as well. So I feel like exactly what you kind of think like is potentially a hurdle. I think we kind of pull back some of those hurdles with like digital theatre and bring it into the home. So I can appreciate that.
And just now we were kind of like talking about the mass cultural appeal. I think it's very interesting, kind of like who the audiences are. And I mean, like, there's a question that I wanted to put forward. Is theater for middle and upper class white people?
I think in Australia at the moment, main stage theatre is definitely for middle and upper class white people, generally. And, you know, that's like it could be for like a number of different reasons, but I think it's due to like in large part to just like the death by 1,000 cuts from government funding of the arts. And that, you know, puts more pressure on private philanthropy and subscriber models for main stage theatres to generate income, which means that, you know, you've got to keep those people on side and keep those people happy. And it's like, I'm all for keeping people happy, but like, I do think that at the moment, lots of main stage theatre programming is, I don't know, young creators are being like locked out of it in a way, or they have to prove their mettle or like age into the 30 age group before they're allowed to have a main season show and all these other things. Not to sound jaded about it, but I do think that there are some pretty huge problems in this country's live performance industry at the moment. And not that I have, you know, like some complete beautiful answers for this, but I just thought I'd kick us off with a bang. What does everyone else think?
I mean, it's very interesting. It's sort of like you mentioned a very interesting point around how the funding and policy can actually affect who we reach out to and theatre, because it requires resources and energy and commitment from the government as well. We need them to back us up as well. I think there is a desire in a lot of companies to, at least at this moment, to have that mass cultural appeal, but or to have as many diverse communities involved. But at the same time, because we do not have the right resources, we've had to go out to the same audiences who we think are safe and secure.
Yeah, and it's a hard system to break when the funding bodies, the companies have been built by the upper white middle class. Do you know what I mean? And I think, it's that thing of who following the money and who's, you know, at the very top and who's in power in those situations, I think. And those are governmental things, but they're also who's sitting in those places at the top making those decisions. And if that doesn't reflect the audience that they're trying to get, then of course it's not going to happen in that way.
Yeah, from experience, the more diverse the team I've worked with to create theatre, that's been reflected in the audience. Which I was thinking about this because I was like, I would have thought that would be more economically beneficial to broaden. Like, if you had if that is the case, the more diverse the creators, the more diverse the audience, then I would have thought it would be more economically viable to, just even from an economic, not even moral or social standpoint, that it would make sense to have a more diverse creators. But yeah, maybe it's that. I think what you're saying, Jay, about that safe thing, I think is very true and concerning.
And I think there's a huge like mental cost for audiences who don't know or don't go to theatre very often, to try and find out what's out there that's accessible and what's interesting to them. Like, if you don't know it's there, then you're not going to find it and you're not even going to look for it. At the same time, we've got the creative teams, like you mentioned, Liam, who are probably looking for the same people that they've always worked with and using the same path that they've gone with before, because there is the time and effort that it takes to try and find someone new who's different.
And I think, from those models, it also feeds into artistic practice and writing practice and things like that. There's been such a long tradition in Australia of teaching the white, well-made play, and the dramaturgies of First Nations dramaturgies, of other communities, of radically queer dramaturgies that exist. The structures we all also learn in, not everyone, but I'd say most of us learn in, is quite a traditional form, and so that also starts to block out who and what and how we make things, I think, as well, and what the stories are that could be expanded from, and how we work with people, maybe.
Totally. It's like all these, like, I don't know, these complicated systems that are like so heavy, and they feel like they're just like moving at such a slow pace. The bigger company you go, the wider net you kind of cast. And while I feel like everyone, especially a lot of young theatre makers at the moment, are like yearning for this like instant change, or we want to see these things happening now. I think it's like really frustrating because, and again, I don't have the answer to this, but like it feels like it's just like, the main stage companies Australia-wide are just gonna kind of keep up with the Joneses, or continue to kind of feed into these traditional models until there's some kind of tipping point. And I don't know what that tipping point will be, but it seems like there have been several tipping points already, but like we've moved past that. So it's a confusing time to be a young artist, I got to tell you.
Definitely a very, very confusing time. Liam, you mentioned something interesting, is kind of like, the thing around reflection and how the theatre needs to reflect. I think at this moment it's not. We're definitely failing at it, and I think perhaps reflection for me is sexy. To be able to see your own stories on stage, I think this is one of our big questions, and hopefully we can find other things that are sexy, or how we can make a theatre sexy. The next question is sort of like around if theatre has got so many limitations. Well, firstly, let's talk about what are the limitations of theatre as an art form. Because a lot of us work between a lot of different fields. I think this would be an interesting question to start off and go into another one.
I mean, for me, the limitations of theatre are, I think it's actually back again to like sort of the definition of your definition, or my definition, or everyone's definition of theatre, right? Because the limitations don't have to be there in that way, but if they are, the more traditional definition of it, the more traditional understanding of, we all sit down and we watch, in that capacity or whatever it is, I guess that's where I find things are limited, when we know there's like multiple different theatre practices, from the virtual all the way to the community based, I think, as well.
Absolutely agree. I mean, if I put my theatre producer hat on, I can think of limitations forever. But as an art form, it's really limitless. And that's one of the reasons I think that we're all drawn to it, and why we stick with it even when it is tough. Like, I just want to keep making theatre, and I want to make something really weird and really cool.
Yeah, I wonder if that will shift as kind of our generation and generations beneath us kind of come into the fore. And I think like things like what we were talking about before, like combining the virtual and the theatrical and all those kinds of things. I wonder how things will shift in the next 5 or 10 years. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like the biggest limitations for theatre for me is often just money and funding. Like, I feel like that's just if I had endless money, I feel like I could pay lots of people to do really fun things and market it and get all the stuff out there. But, you know, there's not a heap of funding, and there's only so much you can do unfunded or independent. And, you know, it's just that, yeah, for me, a lot of the issues is just money for me. Because I agree, I think it's limitless. I think it's got so much potential, and you can, it's that safe thing again. If there was just more money around to experiment and explore and engage new audiences, I think we'd be having less discussions like these ones.
I mean, like, that brings us to an interesting question about why theater? Why does theater need to exist? What if theater dies? What is it giving to us that no other medium does, in a way? I think would be my question for the group.
I feel like Liam said before something about focusing and focusing an audience and focusing a story. And I feel like that is something that appeals to me about theater, is that it's a focusing tool in some ways. But I also think theater is that sort of, more than any other art form that I experience, is full of kind of surprises. Like it has a real a world building to it, and you can begin in one place and think it's about something, and then at the end be completely somewhere else, particularly in, you know, those shows that change you, or those great shows. And so I feel that's what it is for me. It's sort of like a focusing tool, but also something that can is full of surprises in a way.
100%. Like, I think going back to theatre and screen, like screen for me and TV, as it currently stands, like Netflix, all of those subscription models, like, you kind of, when I watch them, it's like for an escape or to wind down or to soothe myself. And, you know, there are amazing TV shows that do remind me of something, or like teach me something, or make me think about something. But I think theatre is like the opposite of kind of like soothing and escapism for me. It's like this thing of reminding me of a certain part of life, or like being alive, and like kind of slapping me across the face with it. And also like being in a bunch of like in a room with a bunch of people. Not that we can do that at the moment. Hopefully we'll be able to do that soon. I think like I just like love becoming like part of that weird little hive mind that you are when you're an audience member in like watching a show. Like, you almost just become this like weird emotional little like, yeah, bee or like insect or something, like buzzing with like a bunch of other people. And I think that effect like has such a weird effect on my individual body, and like also the things that I think about. Yeah, like reminds me of like of life, which sounds so like dumb, but soz about it.
I'm so with you in terms of the like that reminding you of your body, because I was trying to think about this, and I think I almost can't intellectualize it, because there's some kind of like wonder that I can experience in theater in a way that I can't in film and TV, because I guess in film and TV I'm intellectualizing it and I definitely feel things, but there's some kind of body memory that I experience being in a space when other bodies are also present and are simultaneously kind of affecting me. And there's something that I can't quite intellectualize about it. There's something that I remember when I think about my favorite moments of theater that I experience, and it's like something in my body memory that I can't, as I can spend like heaps of sentences trying to talk about it, but it feels, yeah, it feels kind of present in my body memory in a way when I think about my favorite moments of film. They're not there. And I think it is to do with that communitas and that connection of humans and people in a space and physically being affected by other physical bodies, I guess.
Yeah, that's really, really beautiful, Ange, and Liam. I've actually really struggled with this question lately, because with COVID, the things that I thought were theatre, the being in a space together, the liveness of it all have completely been taken away. And so I've had to rethink, you know, what is theatre? And I think there's still something to that being in person nature of theatre that I guess even when you have a live stream, you know, people ask, is this still theatre? I think the thing that you can't like get in film and TV that you can get in maybe a theatre, you know, live stream is the impact of imagination. The fact that the audience has to bring something of their own a lot of the time. You know, you can have a film set in a location, but in a theatre, it's just a empty stage sometimes, and it really does require you, whether it is a filmed play or it's a play that you're luckily seeing live, it really does require you to use your imagination, and that's I think one of the beautiful things about theatre.
And I guess it was also, and I'm just thinking of like my own sort of immersive work and things like that, but what you were kind of saying as well, Tabitha, of like giving something of yourself, but also it's probably down to the sensory nature of it as well, right? You can like touch it and taste it and smell it in a way that is limited in a virtual space. It doesn't have that connection. Yeah, that's probably one of the things that I think it does well by just simply us all being together there is the sensory nature of it all.
And I guess it's sort of like, it's very interesting how much are we thinking about the audiences right now, and just in this conversation, and also how much the ritualistic nature of theatre, or where it began, of bringing people together, is sort of the thing that really sets us apart from any other industry. I guess even with screen, of being able to share that, share story together and experience together. Which brings an interesting conversation. What happens if we put audiences at the heart of are we do you I don't know, what happens if we put audiences at the core of theatre making or curation? I'm sure some of you already do that. I know. Do you want to just talk a little bit more about it? What happens, and is that a way to make it more inclusive? Is that a way to kind of like make it have a bigger mass appeal in a way?
Totally. I think
agree.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I'm with Tabby. Yeah.
But what is an audience? I've got no answer for that. I think we should always make art with the audience in mind. Well, that's what I want to do, but I've got nothing more than that.
Yeah, I think I'm with Tabby. Like, I don't always write from a place where, I think I start writing from a really personal place about what I would want to see. So I guess I'm like audience to my own brain. But I think also while we've been in lockdown, I've been like thinking about the audience problem and the subscriber model problem and stuff, or the pros and the cons of it. And I've also been thinking about like the footy a lot, probably because it's been like in the discourse as like footy versus arts. I don't know. Like I heard some statistic that like 100% of like West Tigers forfeited and like donated the entire cost of their yearly membership to all the games. And I was like, far out. Like, imagine if theatres got that response. Like, what is it about the footy that people just go nuts for? And I feel like that's a really interesting like provocation in terms of like, how can we eke the same excitement from the audiences that we're trying to connect with as the footy in this country? Do we like write a play about the footy? I'm sure that's been done. I don't know.
Liam?
Oh, no, wait. Ian tagged in. He's got something great to say.
Okay.
Oh, thanks, Liam. What was I going to say? Well, I mean, in my practice, the sort of experimental, immersive side is kind of all driven by audience. It's made specifically for making spaces in which audiences can journey through and multiple different art forms around them at once, and giving them a level of like agency within the work themselves. And I feel like when I'm writing a play that doesn't involve a direct audience interaction, I'm probably a bit more selfish in terms of what I'm interested in. And it definitely is I think Tabitha said it, maybe it was, it starts from a place of like what I'm interested in fully, or like, what my pleasure is then and there, and something that I find super interesting and exciting, or a weird idea that I think can start from, makes something interesting. But then, it just naturally happens. I think everyone starts to, as you're writing and you get towards the end, you start thinking, well, like, who is this for anyway? You know what I mean? And you have to start thinking about that, and you naturally do. Or you're writing it for someone or a group of people or something. That's often how I am. It's like written with someone in mind.
Yeah, it's funny. The most recent play of mine that was produced, I realized just structurally in the way that younger people are receiving stories, people that don't generally go to the theatre or don't look at film, or just stories that kind of shift, the mainstream structure, a linear kind of form, that it made me realize how much that limited the audience that really engaged with it for me. And like, that's okay. I think what Ian was saying earlier it's so true. You don't have to always be making theatre for everybody. But in starting to write something in lockdown, where I was trying to engage as big an audience as possible, or trying to write a story about as big a chunk of society as possible, I purposefully tried to structure it in as kind of conservative, linear way as possible, because I know that it's a way that that people will be able to engage with it and continue to follow. Because I don't know, it's an interesting thing, audiences' relationships with stories and their familiarity with stories, and how they are ready to receive them. Yeah.
And I think those structures are useful, right? And they're good to use. It's just in the way you kind of subvert them, or hopefully subvert them in that way. It's like, here's my version of Away, and here's the seaside family drama, but then like, what is the radically queer version of that? Like, what are the things that are important today that I can unpick and use that structure as a way to tell the story? I think that is useful, and that is important still.
Totally. And I feel like there's like a lot of pressure on theatre artists to like just be totally original, or do something that's like radically new and like away from all of these tropes and traditional structures. But like, I feel like when you look at something like film or like TV, like they really find joy in a lot of those structures. And I feel like maybe that's part of why these mediums have like such mass cultural appeal, because like we do want to kind of self-soothe in those ways by, sometimes you just want to watch a rom-com and the structure's like the same, but all the little bits of it are different. And I think you're so right, Ian, when like this idea of subverting those structures and like playing with those structures and putting layers over those structures, like I feel like we should really not be afraid of that. So I really appreciate you saying that, Liam, of like, I'm trying to write this like well-made play, or like a conservatively structured play. Like, I don't think that that's like anything to be ashamed of at all. Like, I think that's something to be celebrated.
I think
absolutely. Also, like there is often, a pressure to try and make something that is different and that pushes the boundaries. And at times, if you feel that pressure too much, it's a bit like a school assignment where you have to do something as different as possible. But if you're focused, I think if the story should drive the structure more than anything else, the story and the audience, you're right, Liam, that if the audience is going to follow you on this journey, then you have to do it in a way that they'll recognize and they'll feel safe with, or feel unsafe with, if that's the point.
Yeah, I think I think I've also experienced sitting in an audience of my plays, and I have totally experienced when an audience is kind of checking out slightly as well. And I think so much of I've experienced in my writing, so much is about pacing. And I think we have the luxury of editing in film and TV that there's no moments where you kind of, where things can kind of slow down and you can ruminate. I mean, obviously there's exceptions in film and TV, but in terms of like what I think younger generations are consuming on the regular, I think there's something about pacing that's, the stuff and the dialogue that I'm watching on screen tends to be like 5 times as fast as the theatre dialogue that I'm watching, if it's that kind of theatre, obviously. And
we have the benefit of like, sorry, camera angles changing that up and other things as well.
Yeah. And I'm like accustomed to that as a theatre goer, that I'm ready to experience that. But I see a lot of people that aren't general theatre goers like check out because the pacing that they've grown accustomed to just isn't there.
And there's also something to, keeping things like simple, right? Like keeping narratives clean, like and keeping keeping it focused. It's particularly with me recently, it's been about less is more, writing less, being as minimal as possible, and focusing on characters, and giving space in the text as well around the dialogue and what they're saying to each other and things like that. And I think that's also very much like appealing to me, what you're saying, for sure.
Ang, were you there?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if you were going to say something, but I'll jump on in. That is why I think like dramaturgs should be normalized, and like I think every like production or like live performance should have a dramaturg or like someone in that seat, because they're just great. And like sometimes, you can just get inside your own head and like think you're great or think that the work is done or something, and then it's not actually done, which is why I love dramaturgs. What about you and your work, Jay? Do you kind of think about the audience, or do you write from a more personal place? / do you use a dramaturg? Are you a dramaturg? Tell me about you.
I mean, kind of like I work very much with the community. I mean, my practice is really embedded in community arts in a way. Working very closely, very verbatim process in a way, because for me, I mean, like I came here to Australia when I was 14, right? And one of the biggest obstacles was language, was text, was stories, was not being reflected, right? And it just firstly didn't make me want to be in theater, but I really loved telling stories. And also, I mean, kind of like there's something about, why theater is different. I think theater has the power to really change things and transform things, and that's what I really love about it. But I try to find universality, and how I do that is I make audiences part of the journey of the writing of the project. Always, they're they. I mean, like even if they're not, if the audience is not, like the 300 or the 1,000, all of those people, but perhaps a microcosm of this audience is a reflection of the audiences that I want to see in my theater, actually present on this journey with me from quite get-go. And at the moment, we are experimenting with here in Perth with a company which is starting with audience consultation and asking people what they want to see on stage. And the audiences that I want my stages to be, I mean, like my stage and my audience, my theater to reflect. So very different practice, but it's an experiment, and I think that's where it's at. And I think COVID, if it has given us opportunities just to pause and sort of go slower. And there's something about pacing, Liam, I guess. There's pacing on stage, but at the same time, it's that social pacing that we haven't had time to do. I think we've been working like, I don't know about you, but it's been a little bit of kind of like just go, 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 projects after project, but COVID's just created this time to pace it all. Which is an interesting question around kind of like brings around inclusivity, which I'm having a very hard time with. It's kind of like, how do we make theater for everyone, and how do we reflect theater for everybody? I mean, like it's actually impossible, or is it possible? And what are universal stories? I mean, those are some of the questions we're dealing with. But I will throw it to you because it's a great question. How do we make theater more inclusive? How do you go about it?
Oh my God, huge question. Well, I have been thinking a lot about this and thinking a lot about space and the implications of space and the types of spaces that theatre is made in. And I feel like it could be an interesting approach, like particularly in my practice of like, what if I just threw all of my preconceptions about how I'm going to get my play to a stage and just put it up in a garage or like my courtyard out the back of my share house? Or like, what if I like went to like my friend's parents' storage unit and did a show for 3 nights there? And like, what if the play was 15 minutes long and it wasn't perfect? What if it was at like 1 a.m. in the morning? What if it was at like 8 a.m. in the morning? I think I've been thinking a lot about that, and I hope that I will actually give it a go and try it out, because I think that that is a potential way of bringing in different audiences or making theatre sexy, or like, just kind of organically breeding these new ways of making our theatre a more inclusive space that people actually want to go to over like opening up their laptop and putting Netflix on.
Some great ideas there, Ang.
I think probably, I mean, Jay and I probably have very similar practices in terms of how we work with certain communities particularly when I'm making sort of immersive and participatory work. And I think that's that those sort of projects take a long time, a really long time, and lots of funding and lots of rounds, and to really be embedded within a subculture or asking specific questions or permissions of certain subcultures. But that's probably where I find the inclusiveness the most interesting thing, or the most exciting thing for me, is when those spaces are open and made directly for those communities, or present the worlds of those communities in a way.
Yeah, I think you, Ian, and Jay are probably doing the best work that we can do at this level in terms of going out and actively engaging the communities that aren't currently being included in theatre, and both as audiences and participants and makers and producers and team members and all of that. In terms of the larger scale things we can do, I think there needs to be so much work done. The first thing I would do is lower ticket prices. And I know that sometimes for a show, it literally does cost $150 a ticket to pay everyone in the cast properly, and to have a building with enough bathrooms and that is insured, and all of those other costs that go into making theatre. So I think if that's how much a show costs, then we need to get more funding and also more, I guess, more ability to use space in exciting ways, like you mentioned. And like, you can, if there are restrictions on the ways that you can use spaces, there often is in Sydney, especially if you're going to try and get a bigger audience in, and it's not just going to be friends. Like, it's often really difficult to access the kinds of space that you need to, especially for non-traditional spaces, to make theatre. So I think those are the two big things that need to happen on a macro level to make theatre more inclusive.
Wow. I think we have got some great ideas there around inclusivity. I mean, like we've been the last 5 weeks been working on this and trying to find out the answer for how do we make it inclusive. Can I ask, I mean, kind of like, we had such rich discussion around all of this. Why should people get behind theater? And what is it that theater does so well?
I was thinking about this, and I think I'm super passionate about theater, so there's a lot of reasons why I think people should get around it. But I also think that like theater should get around people more, like what you were saying in terms, like Ian and Jay, in terms of the work that you're making, or just being more aware of younger, different audiences, and putting audiences first. I think like I don't try to like sell theater to someone who hasn't been. I just try to invite them along to a great show and let them experience it. And if the stuff is there and great work's being made and it's being funded and supported and it's part of our culture, then I think it's I think it's less of a hard sell. If their experience is going to see a traditional play that they felt bored or uninspired or disassociated from, then it's pretty hard to pull people back into that world.
I mean, it makes me think of, the initial thing of like, why isn't theater sexy, or why is it sexy in that way? And like the word sexy to me, what's sexy to me is probably very different to what's is sexy to everybody else here. Maybe not, though. I don't know everyone's like preferences. And so for me, I think it goes back to, again, that what turns people on, what turns us on, what turns audiences on are very different, and they're diverse, and they're multiple different things. And I think that's what can be rallied around or offered, or how people can engage, is that there are like multiple different turn-ons or pleasures.
Totally. At the same time, like I do think it comes back to like something that we were talking about before, which is like that bodily thing that I think you were trying to that you were speaking to, Liam. It's like really hard to articulate, as you mentioned before. But I think we all do have a body, and that's like one of the things that really ties us all together. Whatever your body looks like, whatever your skin color is, whatever your ability is, all those factors. Bodies are still bodies, and like bodies still resonate with each other. And I agree with what you were saying, Ian, of like we all have different things that turn us on in terms of theatre and in terms of life. But it's about finding those commonalities and making theatre for all these different pleasures and all these different needs, and yeah.
Yes, all of those things. And especially because I think, at least outside of COVID, you're experiencing all of that mind, body, soul engagement with other people in the same room, sharing the same space, breathing the same air. And I mean, even now, just the feeling of being live with someone else who's doing the same thing, even though they're in a different state or in a different country, I think that's really, really important for building community, and just feels so good. And Jay, you have to answer this question as
I mean, like, it's a very hard question to articulate, but I think I have something. It's during COVID. I think I had to I came from Sydney to Perth, and I had to isolate for 2 weeks. I wasn't able to see any of my family. Had to stay away because WA is crazy strict about it. And those 2 weeks, not having any people around me, I felt I felt quite alone and disconnected to the world, to stories, to sounds, all those sensory things. And I think theater is, I mean, like, where else do you come together to kind of like actually just hear each other or meet each other or smell? I mean, like, you know, obviously you smell each other, taste each other, I don't know, but to experience something together. And that's there is just no other space except for theater for that to happen. And I think now that we have all felt what isolation is like, I think what theater offers is it gives us and facilitates the space for connection. It's the space that's going to bring people together. And I think artists are going to be the most employable people after this COVID thing has passed. And that human connection, I think that's what theater does best, and that's why people should get behind it, so we can keep it alive, keep meeting each other, even if we are strangers, I guess. Thank you, everybody. This has been an incredible chat. Thank you to National Young Writers Festival bringing us all together. And keep asking yourself, how do we make theater sexy as we go along on this ride into the future? Thank you.
Thanks, Jay.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.